What if I told you that the most sophisticated economic warning ever written about billionaires, tax dodging, corporate monopolies, and the exploitation of workers was not written last year, not in the 20th century, not even in the 19th. It was written in the year 798 CE, in Baghdad, by a judge, and almost everything he warned about is happening right now. Most of us have been taught a very simple story about money and power. We're told that economies are complicated, that taxation is a technical matter for experts, and that the ultra-wealthy accumulating extraordinary advantages is just the natural order of things. But something is wrong with that story, because 1,300 years ago, a man in one of the greatest cities on earth looked at the exact same dynamic: the rich getting richer, the poor getting crushed under taxes. He named it, he explained it, and he wrote a manual to fix it. His name was Abu Yusuf, student of the known Islam scholar Abu Hanifa. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable, because his book, written as advice to a caliph, reads less like an ancient manuscript and more like a leaked memo from someone who has spent years watching our modern world fall apart. So let's go back to Baghdad, back to the moment when one of the most powerful empires in history began rotting from the inside.
This is not right, and we need to help the poor.
Close your eyes for a moment and picture the year 762 CE. Baghdad is being built from scratch, from the ground up. Harun al-Rashid's father and grandfather have commissioned what will become the most extraordinary city in the medieval world. A perfect circle, geometrically designed, an empire at the center of global trade routes stretching from China to Spain. The markets smell of cinnamon and cardamom. Scholars from Persia, Greece, India, and Arabia walk the same streets, translating ancient wisdom, debating medicine and philosophy over cups of strong coffee. The libraries of Baghdad hold more books than anywhere else on earth. It is, by almost every measure, a golden age. Think of the Abbasid Empire the way you might think of a beautiful old house. From the outside, the architecture is breathtaking. The gardens are pristine. Guests come from every corner of the world and leave in awe. But inside the walls, where nobody is looking, there is something terribly wrong with the plumbing. The empire is massive. It stretches across North Africa, through the Middle East, into Central Asia. And to manage something that large, you need an enormous bureaucracy. Officials, administrators, tax collectors, layer after layer of people whose job it is to take the empire's resources and funnel them back to the center. And this is exactly where the rot begins. The tax collectors of the Abbasid Empire were called the Umal. In theory, they were civil servants, public administrators, representatives of the caliph's justice in distant provinces. In practice, they had become something else entirely. Imagine you are a wheat farmer in a province 3 months' journey from Baghdad. The caliph cannot see you. His viziers cannot see you. The only face of the empire you will ever know is the Amil, the local tax collector, who arrives at your farm each season with his ledger and his guards. And here is what nobody in the capital knows, that Amil has made private deals with the large landowners, with the wealthy merchants who control the grain stores. He gives them discounts, exemptions, rounding errors in their favor. And then he rides to your farm, your small, struggling farm, and he demands the full rate, the official rate, regardless of whether it rained this season, regardless of whether your crops failed, regardless of whether your children are hungry. You pay, because the alternative is losing the farm entirely.
We came to collect the tax. We had no rain this year. We have only what to eat, me and my family, sir. This is only half of what is due. You are not paying on time, as always!
This is what Abu Yusuf saw. Not the Baghdad of poetry and philosophy, the Baghdad of court cases, of desperate petitions, of farmers who had lost everything and had no recourse, of markets being quietly strangled. He was the Qadi al-Qudat, the chief justice of the entire empire, the highest judicial authority under the caliph himself, and every day the human wreckage of this broken system appeared before his bench.
We have nothing to eat. How can we pay taxes?
So when Harun al-Rashid, the legendary caliph, the man behind the tales of 1001 Nights, asked his chief justice to write him a practical guide on how to run a just state, Abu Yusuf did not write a book of flattery. He called it the Book of Taxation, and what he put inside it would have been dangerous, genuinely dangerous, in any era, including ours. Here is a question that sounds simple, but has caused more wars, revolutions, and civilizational collapses than almost anything else in human history. Who should carry the weight of society? Who pays for the roads, the hospitals, the armies, the courts, the schools? And how much should they pay? For most of human history, the answer was brutal in its simplicity. Whoever the powerful could most easily squeeze. What he proposed instead was called mukasama, and it was radical, genuinely, historically radical, because mukasama said, you don't pay a fixed amount, you pay a proportion, a share of what you actually produce. Had a great harvest? Your share goes to the state, and you keep the rest. Had a drought? Your share is still a proportion of what you produced, which means if you produced almost nothing, you pay almost nothing.
As you can see, this was a difficult year. I cannot pay the tax.
He called the underlying principle al-Shafa, taxation based on the capacity to pay. Think about what this means. If you're a massive landowner with irrigated estates producing enormous grain surpluses, the proportion produces a large number. If you're a small farmer who just survived a drought, the same proportion produces almost nothing. The wealthy pay more in absolute terms, not because they're being punished, but because they have more. The poor pay less, not because they're being subsidized, but because they have less. This is not charity, this is structural sanity. Abu Yusuf was articulating, in 798 CE, what most nations only stumbled toward in the 20th century. The idea that a just tax system must be calibrated to the lived reality of those paying it. And he didn't bury this idea in complex mathematics. He made it moral.
Why are we only taxing the poor? This is not fair.
He said, a ruler who imposes the same burden on a desperate man as on a wealthy man is not administering a tax. He is committing an injustice. And an empire built on injustice is not stable. It is a building with a rotting foundation. It just hasn't fallen yet. But something strange was happening in Baghdad, even beyond the problem of flat taxes. Let me paint you a picture. It is early morning in the souks of Baghdad. A merchant named Khalid wakes up before dawn and rides to the city gates to buy grain from the incoming farmers. He doesn't buy a little, he buys everything. Every cart, every sack, every measure. He has the capital to do it and the warehouse space to store it. By mid-morning, he has cornered the entire day's supply. By afternoon, when ordinary families come to buy bread for dinner, the grain stalls are empty, except for Khalid's, where the price has tripled. This was not an accident. This was the plan. Abu Yusuf called this iftikar, hoarding, and he saw it happening not just with grain, but with every essential commodity in the empire. Wealthy syndicates were systematically buying up supply chains, choking the flow of goods to the public, and then releasing them at extortionate prices. Not because there was a shortage, but because they had manufactured one. Does this sound familiar? Because it should. Replace grain syndicates in Baghdad with Amazon's relationship with its third-party sellers. Replace medieval hoarding with pharmaceutical companies buying drug patents and tripling prices for no reason other than they can. Replace the wealthy merchant who controls the only grain warehouse with a private equity firm that has acquired all the hospitals in your region. The mechanism is identical. 13 centuries apart, and the mechanism is identical. Abu Yusuf's position on this was not subtle. He did not suggest gentle reforms. He argued that the state's primary economic obligation, above all others, was to smash these monopolistic arrangements wherever they appeared, to break up the syndicates, to ensure that public goods, food, water, infrastructure, the things without which human life is impossible, could never be weaponized by private hands for private profit. He wrote explicitly, when private entities control public goods, the result is not just economic unfairness, it is an existential threat to the stability of the entire society. But here is the part that made Abu Yusuf's blood boil. The canals they dug, the canals built with their sweat and their broken backs, did not irrigate public farmland. They irrigated the private estates of the wealthy landowners who had ordered the work. The people who built the infrastructure received nothing from it. The people who contributed nothing to the building received everything. He laid down a principle as clean and sharp as a blade. If a public resource is built by public effort, its benefits must flow back to the public. Full stop. The moment you let private interests capture publicly funded infrastructure for their own enrichment, while contributing nothing to its cost, you have broken something fundamental in the social contract. And this is where the story becomes surprisingly modern, Because what is a publicly funded road that a trillion-dollar corporation uses to deliver its packages while paying almost zero in local taxes? What is a publicly funded internet grid, built by government research and military investment, that became the foundation of the largest private fortunes in human history? What are publicly subsidized universities producing the engineers and scientists who power the tech industry, while those same corporations shift their profits to Irish tax shelters? The community builds the infrastructure, the wealthy redirect the harvest. And here is the part that made Abu Yusuf particularly furious, because he understood the full human cost of it. The laborers forced to build the canals weren't just being exploited in the moment, they were being kept exactly where the powerful needed them, poor, dependent, with no options and no leverage. Wage suppression is not a modern invention, it is an ancient strategy. When you ensure workers have no alternative, you can pay them almost nothing. When you pay them almost nothing, they cannot accumulate savings. When they cannot accumulate savings, they cannot leave. They remain exactly where you need them, building your canals, season after season, generation after generation. Abu Yusuf saw this in 8th century Baghdad. He described it in precise moral terms. And we have rebuilt the same system with different vocabulary. We think about economies in terms of numbers, GDP, tax revenue, deficit projections, and those numbers matter. But Abu Yusuf was a judge, not an accountant. He didn't think about economies through spreadsheets. He thought about them through people, through the look on a farmer's face when he realized the system was designed against him, through the moment a craftsman understood that his honest work would always earn less than a corrupt merchant's dishonest leverage. Abu Yusuf understood something that modern economists spent centuries ignoring and are only now reluctantly beginning to accept. An economy is not just a machine, it is a moral agreement. And when that agreement is violated, when people can see with their own eyes that the system is rigged, something irreversible happens inside them. Think of the tax system as a bridge that a whole society agrees to walk across together. Every person pays their toll, and the bridge stays strong and usable for everyone. The wealthy pay more because their cargo is heavier, and they use the bridge more. The ordinary person pays less but still pays. And because the system seems basically fair, everyone maintains it. Everyone has a stake in it. Now imagine that one morning you watch the richest merchants ride across the bridge without paying. The toll collector smiles at them and waves them through, and then he turns to you, with your modest cart and your season's modest earnings, and demands the full rate. What happens next? First, you feel it as an insult, then as a question, then slowly as a recalculation. You start to wonder, why am I paying? If the rules don't apply equally, then the rules are not rules at all. They are a racket, and participating in a racket while others profit from it is not civic virtue, it is stupidity. Abu Yusuf warned Harun al-Rashid that this moment, the moment the average person stops believing in the fairness of the system, is the beginning of the end. Not the military end, not the financial end, the moral end, the end that precedes all the others. Because once people stop trusting the system, something cascades. Tax evasion stops being a crime in the public imagination and starts being common sense. Why pay into a system that takes everything from you and gives it to people who are already wealthy? The honest business that pays its taxes cannot compete with the corrupt enterprise that doesn't. So the honest business either starts cheating to survive or it fails. And the corrupt enterprise grows larger, more entrenched, more powerful. Meanwhile, the public infrastructure that depended on tax revenue starts crumbling. Roads deteriorate, courts become corrupt, the army underpays its soldiers, the social services that people relied on vanish. And as conditions worsen, the people who still believe in the state, who still feel loyalty to the common project, begin to feel like fools. Abu Yusuf told the caliph, and this is the line that should be engraved on the walls of every parliament and congress in the world, a ruler's true strength is not measured by the size of the treasury. It is measured by the felt sense of justice among the poorest citizens.
My king, this is not right, and we need to help the poor.
A kingdom can be swimming in gold and be on the verge of collapse, and a kingdom with modest wealth but genuine justice can endure for centuries. The treasury is the symptom, justice is the cause. What Abu Yusuf documented in Kitab al-Kharaj was not a unique Abbasid problem. It was not a medieval problem. It was not even a Muslim world problem. It was a human problem. A problem that emerges every time a society grows wealthy enough for the powerful to begin separating themselves from the obligations that built that wealth in the first place. And we are watching it happen in real time right now. Start with the tax collectors. In Abu Yusuf's era, the were the predatory middlemen, cutting deals with the wealthy, squeezing the poor, making the official system serve unofficial interests. In our era, we call these middlemen something different. We call them tax advisors, offshore structuring specialists, wealth management firms with teams dedicated to helping clients minimize their global tax obligations. The moral anatomy is identical. In both cases, there is an official system that appears neutral on paper. And then there is the real system, the system accessed by those with enough money which operates by entirely different rules. The billionaire who parks his money in the Cayman Islands is doing precisely what the medieval grain merchant did when he bribed the Amil. He is separating himself from the shared obligation. He is saying, implicitly, the rules apply to you, not to me. Think about the tax haven the way Abu Yusuf would have recognized it. Now look at what Abu Yusuf called the exploitation of labor, forcing workers to build infrastructure for private benefit while paying them as little as possible. In 8th century Baghdad, this meant conscripting farmers to dig private canals. In 21st century America, it looks like this. A delivery driver for a major corporation earns less per hour than a living wage in most cities. They drive on public roads. They rely on publicly subsidized GPS satellites. They benefit from a public postal infrastructure that normalized the concept of reliable nationwide delivery. They were educated, in many cases, through publicly funded schools. The entire ecosystem that makes their work possible was built and paid for collectively, and the corporation that employs them technically classifies them as independent contractors, which means no benefits, no overtime, no workers' compensation, no legal employment protections. That corporation is, in the same tax year, reporting revenues in the hundreds of billions while its effective tax rate approaches single digits. Abu Yusuf had a phrase for this arrangement. He called it tyranny. Not a market inefficiency, not a regulatory gap. Tyranny. Trust in government, collapsing. Trust in corporations, collapsing. Trust in media, courts, banks, elections, collapsing across the board. Not because all of these institutions have become secretly evil, but because for long enough, a significant portion of the population has watched the system operate on a different set of rules for different kinds of people, and has drawn the only rational conclusion available. The bridge is damaged, people are rushing off it, and nobody in power seems to understand that the damage isn't structural, it's moral. And moral damage, Abu Yusuf knew, is the hardest kind to repair. When a corporation pays a lower effective tax rate than the nurse who cleans its office building, that is not an accident of complexity. That is a statement. It says, the nurse's contribution to society is more obligated. The corporation's is optional. When a billionaire can accumulate more wealth in a single day than a schoolteacher will earn in 30 years, and then pay a lower percentage of that wealth in taxes than the schoolteacher pays from her salary, that is not a natural law. That is a political choice dressed up as arithmetic. Abu Yusuf would have recognized it immediately. He spent his career naming exactly these kinds of choices, and he called them what they were. And looking at the world today, the inequality, the collapsed institutions, the loopholes, the monopolies, the felt sense among hundreds of millions of people that the game was rigged before they ever sat down to play,